What happens when Hollywood's most controlled superstar walks onto a late-night stage designed for satire, unpredictability, and live television chaos? And the jokes stop being jokes. What happens when a smile freezes, laughter dies mid-breath, and millions of viewers realize they're watching something that was never meant to happen? Before we go any further, subscribe to the Narration Show, like this video, and comment below, because moments like this don't come twice, and this one rewrote live TV history. The studio lights of the Ed Sullivan Theater burned brighter than usual that night, reflecting off polished floors and the familiar blue glow of the stage. The band had just finished their final flourish, horns snapping the air with confidence, applause rolling like a friendly tide. Stephen Colbert stood at center stage, cue cards in hand, wearing that practiced grin, half comedian, half ringmaster. He'd done this thousands of times. Controlled chaos. That was the art. But backstage, Tom Cruise stood perfectly still. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't rehearsing lines. He wasn't joking with producers the way other guests did. He stood alone, hands folded, jaw tight, eyes focused on nothing and everything at once. The smile he would soon wear hadn't arrived yet. It was waiting, carefully folded like a tailored jacket, ready to be put on at the exact right moment. A producer approached him. 30 seconds, Tom. Cruise nodded. Calm. Polite. Professional. But something sat beneath the surface, something sharp and restless. This wasn't his first late-night interview. He knew the rhythm, the playful digs, the Scientology jokes that never quite crossed the line, but hovered close enough to sting. He'd accepted them before, smiled through them. Tonight, though, something felt different. Colbert adjusted his glasses at the desk, glancing toward the camera as the applause died down. My next guest, he began, voice light, is one of the biggest movie stars on the planet. You know him from impossible missions, death-defying stunts, and running. So much running. Please welcome Tom Cruise. The crowd exploded. Tom Cruise stepped out into the light, smile in place now, bright and unmistakable. The audience rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, phones already up. For a moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Two icons. One stage. Late-night magic. They shook hands. A brief hug. Cameras flashed. Cruise waved to the crowd, soaking it in like a seasoned performer who knew exactly how long to hold the moment before sitting down. But as he settled into the chair opposite Colbert's desk, something shifted. Colbert leaned back, studying him with mock seriousness. Tom Cruise, he said, I have to ask, are you ever going to make a movie where you don't risk your life? Laughter. Easy. Safe. Cruise chuckled, nodding. Well, Stephen, if I did that, I think people would ask for their money back. More laughter. Applause. So far, so good. Colbert grinned wider. Fair enough. Because I've seen you hang off planes, jump off cliffs, and outrun explosions. At this point, I'm starting to think the real Mission Impossible is your insurance policy. The band hit a playful sting. Cruise laughed again, but this time, it didn't quite reach his eyes. Let's just say, Cruise replied, leaning forward slightly, I trust my preparation. Colbert raised an eyebrow. Ah yes. Preparation, dedication, total commitment. Some might even call it intense. The word lingered. A few audience members laughed uncertainly. Cruise tilted his head, still smiling, but now the smile was thinner. Controlled. I think excellence requires intensity, he said. In anything. Colbert nodded, tapping his desk. Sure. Acting. Stunts. Running. Belief systems. The air changed. The band didn't play. The audience reaction came slower, scattered. A ripple of discomfort moved through the room like a cold draft. Cruise's smile stayed frozen for half a second too long. Then he leaned back in his chair. Belief systems? Cruise repeated softly. Colbert shrugged, feigning innocence. You know, people are fascinated by you. The discipline. The philosophy. The way you seem unshakable. A camera cut to Cruise's face. His eyes were steady now. Focused. Not angry, but alert. Fascination often comes from misunderstanding, Cruise said. Colbert smiled. That's why we're here. To understand. A beat passed. Cruise glanced briefly toward the audience, then back to Colbert. Are we talking about movies tonight, Stephen? The crowd murmured. The tension was no longer subtle. Colbert laughed lightly, raising his hands. Hey, I'm just saying, when you're one of the most powerful stars in the world, people are going to ask questions. And when you're behind a desk, Cruise replied calmly, People sometimes forget there's a line between curiosity and provocation. Silence. The band leader shifted uncomfortably. A producer off camera lowered his headset. Colbert straightened in his chair. The smile was still there, but now it was defensive. Provocation is kind of my job. Cruz nodded once. And responsibility is part of mine. The audience erupted, not in laughter, but in applause. Loud. Sudden. Unplanned. Colbert blinked, momentarily thrown. Okay, he said, chuckling. I didn't expect this to turn into a courtroom drama. Cruz leaned forward again, elbows on his knees now. The posture wasn't aggressive, but it was intimate. Direct. Dangerous for live television. I've spent 40 years being analyzed, joked about, dissected, Cruz said. I've stayed silent more times than I can count. But silence shouldn't be mistaken for weakness. A hush fell over the room. Even the cameras seemed to slow. Colbert swallowed, then tried to steer the ship back. No one's accusing you of weakness, Tom. You do your own stunts. That alone is not a gimmick, Cruz interrupted, voice firm but controlled. It's a choice, just like standing behind comedy when it's convenient. The audience gasped. A few nervous laughs escaped, quickly drowned by stunned quiet. Colbert's eyes hardened slightly. Are you saying comedy is a shield? I'm saying, Cruz replied, locking eyes with him, that respect matters, even when the lights are on. Another wave of applause rolled through the theater, louder this time. Some people stood. Others looked around, unsure if they were witnessing brilliance or disaster. Colbert forced a smile. Well, this is live TV. Cruz nodded. Exactly. The moment stretched. Producers whispered frantically backstage. The teleprompter froze on an unused joke. Somewhere, a network executive felt their stomach drop. Colbert cleared his throat. Let's take a breath, he said, trying to lighten the tone. You're here promoting your new film. Cruz didn't move. I'm here because conversations matter, he said. And so does how we have them. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunderous. Colbert leaned back, realizing, too late, that the usual rules no longer applied. This wasn't banter. This was a line being drawn live in front of millions. And what kind of conversation do you want, Tom? Colbert asked, quieter now. Cruz paused. For the first time, he looked almost reflective. An honest one, he said, without smirks. The camera zoomed in. The audience waited, breath held. And in that charged silence, it became clear. This interview was no longer scripted by cue cards or jokes. It had turned into something raw, unpredictable, and unforgettable. And it was only just beginning. The silence after Tom Cruise's last words didn't feel empty. It felt heavy, like the air itself had weight. You could hear it in the faint hum of studio lights. See it in the way Stephen Colbert's fingers tightened around his cue cards, knuckles whitening as if paper might suddenly become a lifeline. This was no longer the familiar dance of host and guest. This was something raw, unfiltered, unfolding live, and no one in the room could pretend otherwise. Colbert let out a small laugh, the kind meant to release tension, but it floated awkwardly and fell flat before reaching the audience. Honest is good, he said, nodding slowly. Honest is refreshing. Tom Cruise held his gaze. He didn't smile this time. His expression was composed, almost serene, but there was intensity behind his eyes, an intensity sharpened by decades of control, discipline, and a lifetime spent under a microscope. Then let's be honest, he replied. The crowd reacted instinctively. A murmur rippled through the seats, excitement mixed with unease. People leaned forward, phones discreetly rising again despite ushers' warnings. Everyone could feel it. This wasn't going back to normal. Colbert shifted in his chair. He glanced briefly toward the band, then back to Cruz. You've been one of the most influential figures in entertainment for a long time, he began carefully. With that influence comes curiosity. People talk. They speculate. Cruz nodded. They always have. And sometimes, Colbert continued, comedy reflects what people are already saying. Cruz inhaled slowly, as if choosing patience over instinct. Comedy can reflect, he said. It can also distort. The band stayed silent. No playful sting. No safety net. You know, Colbert said, leaning forward now, voice softer. I grew up watching your movies. You were larger than life. Still are. But when someone becomes that powerful, people wonder, who's really in control? That was it. A visible shift ran through Cruz's posture. He straightened, shoulders back, not defensive, not aggressive, decisive. Control, he said quietly. is something people project onto others when they don't understand commitment. A few audience members applauded. Others exchanged glances. Colbert raised his hands slightly. I'm not attacking you. Cruz's voice remained calm. I didn't say you were. I said words matter. Another beat passed. The tension was no longer subtle. It pressed against the room like a rising tide. Do you ever feel, Colbert asked, carefully stepping forward, that the mystique around you creates distance? That people don't feel like they really know you? Cruz smiled faintly. People don't need to know me, he said. They need to know my work. That answer landed hard. It wasn't evasive, it was final. Colbert exhaled, tapping his desk again, a nervous habit creeping in. That's an interesting way to put it. It's an honest one. The audience applauded again, louder now, divided but energized. Somewhere off stage, a producer whispered urgently into a headset, eyes darting between monitors. Colbert tilted his head. So when people joke, speculate, question, you see that as crossing a line? I see it, Cruz replied, as people confusing access with entitlement. A sharp intake of breath swept through the crowd. This wasn't just about jokes anymore. This was about power, perception, and the invisible contract between fame and the public. Colbert leaned back, breaking eye contact for the first time. We're not entitled to anything, he said, but we're allowed to ask. Cruz didn't hesitate. And I'm allowed to answer. The way he said it, measured, unwavering, sent another wave of applause through the room. Even Colbert nodded slightly, acknowledging the point. All right, Colbert said, trying to regain rhythm. Let me ask you this then. Do you think the public misunderstands you? Cruz paused. The pause felt intentional, calculated, the kind of pause that made everyone lean in. I think, he said slowly, the public sees what they're fed. Headlines, sound bites, jokes clipped out of context. And then they think they've met me. A murmur of agreement rose from parts of the audience. Colbert frowned thoughtfully. Isn't that part of being famous? It's part of being visible, Cruz corrected. Not the same thing. For a split second, Colbert smiled, genuine this time. That's fair. The temperature in the room dipped slightly, tension easing just enough to let people breathe. But it didn't last. Colbert glanced down at his cards, then back up. You've spoken before about responsibility, he said. About how you see your role as more than just entertainment. Yes, Cruz said simply. Some would say, Colbert continued, choosing his words with surgical precision now, that responsibility includes addressing controversy. The word controversy hung in the air like smoke. Cruz's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Controversy, he said, is often manufactured. Colbert met his gaze. Not always. The audience reacted instantly, gasps, whispers, a few nervous laughs. This was dangerous territory, and everyone knew it. Cruz leaned forward again, voice lowering. Stephen, he said, you're a smart man. You know the difference between curiosity and provocation. Colbert didn't flinch. And you're a powerful man. You know the difference between privacy and secrecy. The room froze. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The cameras captured Cruz's face in close-up, eyes steady, expression unreadable. Somewhere in the audience, someone whispered, "Oh my God." Then Cruz spoke. Secrecy, he said evenly, is hiding wrongdoing. Privacy is protecting one's humanity. The applause that followed was immediate and explosive. People stood. Some clapped above their heads. Others looked stunned, as if they'd just watched a courtroom closing argument instead of a late-night interview. Colbert nodded slowly, absorbing it. You came ready tonight. I came honest, Cruz replied. Colbert smiled again, but this time there was no humor in it. Honesty can be uncomfortable. So can truth. The band leader glanced toward the producers, unsure whether to jump in. No signal came. This was out of their hands now. Colbert leaned back, folding his arms. Let me be honest too, he said. My job is to ask what people are thinking, even when it's uncomfortable. And mine, Cruz said, is to respond when silence becomes permission. The audience erupted once more. This time, the applause was mixed with cheers. The energy in the room had shifted completely. This wasn't confrontation for shock value. This was two worldviews colliding under studio lights. Colbert let out a slow breath. Do you think, he asked quietly, that moments like this help? Cruz considered him. I think, he said, they reveal. Reveal what? Who's willing to stand behind their words when there's no script? That landed like a thunderclap. Colbert glanced briefly toward the camera, breaking the fourth wall for a fraction of a second. Millions at home felt it. The realization that they were watching something unscripted, something dangerous, something real. Well, Colbert said finally, straightening his jacket, we're definitely off script. Cruz nodded once. That's where truth usually is. The applause surged again, but this time there was something else beneath it, a sense of disbelief. Viewers at home were already typing, clipping, posting. Social media feeds were igniting in real time, hashtags forming before the interview had even ended. Colbert looked at Cruz, a trace of admiration flickering through his guarded expression. You know, he said, not everyone would sit here and do this. Cruz's voice softened just a touch. Not everyone has to. Another pause. Another breath held by thousands in the room and millions beyond it. And yet, Colbert added, you did. Cruz met his eyes. Because moments like this, he said, define more than careers. They define character. The room fell quiet again, not tense this time, but reverent. The kind of quiet that follows a line no one expected to hear on late-night television. Colbert nodded slowly. Then let's keep going. The audience gasped, then applauded, sensing that whatever came next would push this even further beyond the bounds of a normal interview. And as the cameras kept rolling, it became clear to everyone watching. This wasn't just an unforgettable clash. It was a turning point, and the hardest part was still ahead. The applause faded slowly, like distant thunder rolling away from the theater, leaving behind a charged stillness that felt almost sacred. Stephen Colbert adjusted his tie, a subtle gesture, but one that betrayed the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. Tom Cruise sat perfectly still, hands resting calmly, eyes alert. 2 men, 2 empires, 1 live microphone, no escape now. Colbert cleared his throat. You know, he said, forcing a lightness into his tone that no longer quite fit. This is usually the part where we show a funny clip. A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the audience. Cruz nodded slightly. We can do that, he said. Or we can keep talking. The audience reacted instantly. Applause surged again, louder than before. They wanted this. They needed this. Colbert smiled, but it was the smile of someone stepping onto unstable ground. All right, he said. Let's keep talking. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk now, mirroring Cruz's earlier posture. The symmetry wasn't lost on anyone. You've built a career on control, Colbert said. Precision. Planning. Nothing left to chance. Cruz didn't interrupt. But live television, Colbert continued, is chaos. You don't control the questions. You don't control the reactions. You don't even control how this will be remembered. Cruz finally spoke. Control, he said evenly, isn't about dominating outcomes. It's about mastering yourself within them. A hush fell again. Colbert studied him. And right now, I'm exactly where I choose to be. The line hit hard. The audience applauded, but there was something uneasy beneath it. This wasn't bravado. It was conviction. Colbert nodded slowly. Then let me ask you something people argue about endlessly, he said. Do you think the public owes you respect, or do you earn it continuously? Cruz exhaled, thoughtful. Respect, he said, isn't owned. It's exchanged. Colbert raised an eyebrow. Even when you're one of the most powerful men in Hollywood? Especially then. That answer shifted the room. You could feel it. Even Colbert paused, letting the weight of it settle. You know, Colbert said after a moment, there's a perception that you don't like being challenged. Cruz smiled faintly. There's a difference between being challenged and being caricatured. The audience murmured in agreement. Some clapped softly, instinctively. Colbert's jaw tightened. So when comedians joke, they influence, Cruz finished calmly. And influence carries responsibility. The band remained silent, almost reverent now, as if music would somehow cheapen what was happening. Colbert leaned back, crossing his legs. Do you ever worry, he asked, that seriousness alienates people? That refusing to laugh at yourself creates distance? Cruz considered this longer than the others. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, more reflective. I laugh, he said. With friends. With family. With people who know me. But I don't perform vulnerability for approval. That landed differently. The applause was slower, more thoughtful. People weren't cheering. They were processing. Colbert nodded, eyes narrowing slightly in contemplation. That's an interesting boundary. It's a necessary one. A pause stretched between them. The tension hadn't vanished. It had matured. This was no longer a clash. It was a negotiation. Colbert glanced briefly toward the audience. You're watching this, he said, half to them, half to Cruz. And I guarantee people at home are already choosing sides. Cruz smiled faintly. They always do. And you're okay with that? I'm not here to be chosen, Cruz said. I'm here to be understood, or not. The blunt honesty sent another wave through the room. Someone in the back stood up to clap. Then another. The applause grew, not explosive, but steady and resolute. Colbert waited for it to die down. You know, he said quietly, this is probably the most serious conversation we've ever had on this show. Cruz looked around the theater, taking in the faces, the lights, the magnitude of the moment. Serious doesn't mean hostile, he said. It means it matters. Colbert smiled, genuinely this time. You're not wrong. He hesitated, then went further. Do you think Hollywood punishes people for not playing along? The question drew a collective inhale from the audience. Cruz didn't flinch. Hollywood rewards conformity, he said. Until it doesn't. Colbert chuckled softly. That sounds like experience talking. Cruz met his gaze. It is. The crowd reacted with a low murmur, recognition, speculation, curiosity igniting all at once. Colbert leaned forward again. So why now, he asked. Why speak this openly tonight? Cruz's eyes softened slightly. Because silence, he said, can become a lie if it goes on too long. The applause that followed was thunderous. People stood again, clapping, cheering, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Late-night television had never felt like this. Colbert waited, letting it wash over the stage. When it finally faded, he spoke more softly than before. Do you think, he asked, that moments like this change anything? Cruz looked at him, then at the audience, then directly into the camera. They change the people willing to listen, he said. That's enough. A chill ran through the room. Colbert nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of that answer. You know, he said, I think a lot of people expected fireworks tonight. Cruz smiled slightly. Fireworks are easy, he said. Conversations are harder. Another round of applause rose, sustained and respectful. Colbert laughed quietly, shaking his head. I have to admit, he said, this didn't go the way I thought it would. Cruz leaned back at last, posture easing for the first time since the clash began. The truth rarely does. Colbert glanced toward the producers, who now watched with expressions somewhere between panic and awe. We still have time, he said slowly. And a lot of people watching. Cruz met his eyes again. Then let's not waste it. The audience erupted once more, sensing instinctively that the final act was approaching, that whatever came next would echo far beyond the walls of this theater. Social media timelines were already ablaze. Clips were being cut in real time. Commentators were scrambling for words. But inside the Ed Sullivan Theater, none of that mattered yet. Because the most defining moment, the one that would determine how this night would be remembered, was still waiting to happen. The room felt different now. Not electric, settled. Like a storm that had passed overhead and left the air impossibly clear. Stephen Colbert sat still behind his desk, the familiar late-night armor gone. Tom Cruise remained composed, but there was a looseness in his shoulders that hadn't been there before, as if something long carried had finally been set down, if only for a moment. Colbert broke the silence first, his voice quieter than it had been all night. You know, he said, this is usually where I wrap things up with a joke and a handshake. A soft ripple of laughter moved through the audience. Cruise smiled. Not the polished premiere smile, not the defensive one either, but something closer to human. We can still shake hands, he said. Jokes can wait. Colbert nodded, glancing toward the audience, then back at Cruz. I won't pretend this was easy, he admitted. For either of us. Cruz inclined his head. Meaningful things rarely are. That single line seemed to unlock the room. Applause rose, not explosive this time, but warm, sustained, appreciative. It wasn't cheering for a winner. It was recognition. People knew they'd witnessed something that couldn't be rehearsed or repeated. Colbert stood, extending his hand across the desk. Cruz rose as well. When they shook hands, it wasn't rushed. It lingered just long enough for cameras to catch the moment, and for everyone watching to understand that whatever this had been, it was real. Thank you for staying in it, Colbert said, almost sotto voce. Thank you for letting it happen, Cruz replied. The audience stood. A full standing ovation. Some clapped above their heads. Others simply stared, mouths slightly open, as if trying to memorize the moment before it slipped away. The band finally played, but softly restrained, more respectful than celebratory. As the applause continued, Colbert turned back to the camera, still standing beside Cruz. Well, he said, that's all the time we have tonight. Groans and laughter erupted from the crowd. But clearly, Colbert added, This conversation isn't over. Cruz looked out over the audience one last time, eyes scanning the faces. Conversations never really end, he said. They just move. The red light on the camera blinked. And then it was over. Or at least, that's what the broadcast clock said. Backstage, producers stared at their monitors in stunned silence. No one spoke for several seconds after the feed cut. Then the room exploded into frantic motion. Phones buzzing, assistants running, executives shouting overlapping questions. Did we just air that? Clip everything. Social's already going insane. We need a statement. No, wait. Tom Cruise walked down the narrow hallway toward his dressing room, the echo of applause still ringing faintly in his ears. A staffer tried to approach him, then thought better of it. Cruise didn't stop. He didn't need to. Whatever needed to be said had already been said, on camera, live, unfiltered. Stephen Colbert remained on set longer than usual, seated again behind his desk, staring at the empty chair Cruise had occupied. The cue cards lay untouched. A writer hovered nearby, uncertain. That, Colbert finally said, exhaling, is going to be a conversation. He wasn't wrong. Within minutes, clips flooded social media. Not the jokes. Not the intro. The lines. The pauses. The eye contact. Silence shouldn't be mistaken for weakness. Privacy is protecting one's humanity. Conversations are harder. Hashtags ignited. Hashtag Colbert Cruise. Hashtag Live TV Moment. Hashtag Unscripted. Comment sections became battlegrounds. Some praised Cruise for finally pushing back, for reclaiming his narrative on his own terms. Others accused him of being too serious, too controlled, too unwilling to laugh. Some defended Colbert's role as a comedian, a questioner, a stand-in for public curiosity. Others argued he'd crossed a line and felt it. News outlets rushed out headlines within the hour. Late night goes off script. Tom Cruise confronts Stephen Colbert live. A tense exchange that stopped the laughs. Media analysts replayed the footage frame by frame the next morning. Body language experts weighed in. Publicists whispered. Late-night hosts referenced it carefully, cautiously, as if handling something volatile. And through it all, one thing was undeniable. People were talking. Not about a movie. Not about a joke. But about respect. About boundaries. About what happens when power meets scrutiny in real time, with nowhere to hide. Colbert opened the next night's show with a measured monologue. No apology, no jab, just acknowledgement. Last night, he said, we had a real conversation. Those can be uncomfortable. They can also be necessary. The audience applauded. Tom Cruise, meanwhile, made no statement. No tweet. No follow-up interview. The silence this time wasn't avoidance. It was punctuation. Weeks later, the moment still circulated. Not because it was explosive, but because it was honest. Because it reminded viewers that behind the glare of fame and the safety of comedy, there are real lines, real stakes, and real people choosing whether to cross them. And now the question shifts to you. Did Tom Cruise draw a necessary boundary? Or did he overstep on a stage built for humor? Did Stephen Colbert push too far? Or simply do his job? Share your opinion in the comments. This moment belongs to the conversation now. And if you want more unforgettable clashes, unscripted showdowns, and cinematic stories that pull you inside the moment, subscribe to the Narration Show. Because sometimes the most powerful television isn't planned. It happens live.